So this video is about why I don't live in Oz. Hopefully I'm not going to ramble too much. It does tend to be a rambling topic for me. For all those people who aren't from Oz, Oz is the shortened version of what Australians call the country. So it's better known as Australia. We have a very unusual habit of shortening most things. I could teach you some shorthand Australian, but there's plenty of videos on the internet that, by the way, are funny as, so I would really recommend you have a look at some of them. But for me personally, there's a few major reasons why I don't live in Australia. Some would probably border on ridiculous for people. Others are just practical. And some are just kind of very specific to me. So one of the ones that maybe people think are ridiculous or not is spiders. Yes, 8-legged arachnids. Australia has the most spiders on the planet. Now, most of them aren't aggressive and most of them aren't dangerous, but a lot of them are big and they run and they jump and they're hairy. And that's enough for me. I was speaking to my accountant in the UK, who's a great friend, and I happened to discuss something and I said, da-da-da, Spider Town, and he went, where's Spider Town? And I said, it's not a town, Craig, it's the whole country. Because it is the whole country. Because, just to overshare on the spider topic, when there's floods or rain or too much, they just invade houses en masse, and they can fly. Well, they jump and it looks like they're flying. Generally they don't fly, but yeah. And as I said, they're not necessarily dangerous. There's a few that you have to worry about, like a few of everything there. But there's just a lot of them. And for me, I don't like, say for example, if I was looking behind me and then suddenly out of the corner of my eye I see, that's the thing that really I dislike. And of course, you know, if they're too big, well, I have to move out of the house. There is a YouTuber in the US and he had a conversation with his mother and talked about this spider in his room, and his mother said to him, why are you in the spider's room? And that's how I would be, because then the spider owns the room. So I'm not into spiders, and being a fair bit away from anything that is scary for me is the issue. Now, just as a separate, I understand they have a purpose on the planet. I think it's fantastic that they exist. I know that they keep the insect populations under control, circle of life, all of that. Personally, I have nothing against them. I just can't share a residence with them. It's fairly simple. And because they tend to turn up everywhere in Australia, it tends to be me staying in the country would be a problem. So that's also been the reason I apologise to the continent of South America and all of the countries there that I haven't been to you yet, because you have lots of spiders. You have gargantuan tarantulas. Let me say that again. Gargantuan tarantulas. Gargantuan meaning mega. Okay? So that's one of the reasons. Now, would that keep me out? Well, I don't know. But yeah, I don't have close connections with my family there. And in fact, being on the other side of the world from them has actually been a wonderful thing. Again, a longer story for other videos, but it means that I don't have the natural connections to Australia and staying and being there for those reasons. I would also consider myself, which is kind of a controversial category, I realise, a cultural refugee. And I'm going to mention a few things now that I'm going to be probably berated for in comments or disparaged, but it is what it is. I am a non-drinking Irish Australian who does not watch sport. Now, they may seem superficial to the rest of the world who hasn't grown up, being born and raised in Australia, or understands the conventions of Australian culture. But a key part of those conventions, a key part, humongous part, is it's a drinking culture. And the reason I don't drink is I actually don't enjoy the taste. I have taste buds that just get bitter. They just get a bit of flavour from anything alcoholic, coffee, or real chocolate. It's actually 25% of the population, ironically, but it doesn't tend to be discussed. But Genetically, apparently, I've missed out on both fronts. So I don't necessarily participate in that part of Australian culture, and I don't watch sport. I'll watch the odd thing, but it's not my focus, and culturally it's a very strong focus in Oz. So I'm culturally already kind of a bit outside of what would be considered naturally Australian. I've had this accent my whole life, so this is a natural accent, but it's on occasion questions by locals and visitors as to where I'm visiting from when I was even in my own country, which I understand. But Brits pick it, always pick it. So as a result of the whole non-drinking thing, it does tend to put a bit of a dampener on being sort of seen as part of the crowd, which is fine, but it's also a culture that tends to have less things in common otherwise, so that tends to be a bit of a uniting force, and when you're not part of that, it can be an issue. Now, again, would these things alone keep me out? Probably not. The biggest thing has probably been that I'm not a natural fit, and it's very far from a lot of things, and so I've been able to explore a lot more and see a lot more and experience a lot more of the world. Years ago, I think in 2006 was the first time that I experienced walking across a land border between countries. And ironically, this walk was across, which you can't do now, from the Turkish to well, I don't know if you can now, you couldn't for a while, from the Turkish to the Syrian border, because I was on a tour. And it just blew my mind, because with Australia, you have to fly out. You're in the middle of the ocean. It's one big country. That's it. And the closest country to fly to is a couple of hours. So, and flying from one end to the other is 6 hours. So, you're used to this whole distance phenomenon. So being in Europe, where I can, walk across, bus across, train across, I don't even know if I crossed when I crossed in, except my phone sends me a message. You are now in the EU roaming zone of this country. So yeah, it's very far from everywhere, and so for me it isn't the best place to be, and culturally I just don't necessarily have a distinct fit. So as a cultural refugee, it just means you don't have a stack in common with your own culture, and you don't necessarily have a lot in common with other cultures, but when you're in a place in the world where there's always a lot of other cultures, it makes it really interesting. So one of the first reasons why London was significantly interesting, particularly pre-Brexit, was that everybody was from everywhere. So London didn't have a dominant culture. So if you're in a city that's very multicultural, it doesn't have a dominant culture. It doesn't have the local dominant culture. Like, you're in Britain without being in Britain. It's like, well, I don't know if Sydney's ever really been this way, but it'd be like being in Sydney without being in Australia. It's part of it, but it's not part of it at the same time. So as such, it means that anyway, you're kind of in a microcosm that's a little bit separate. So why I don't live in Oz, it hasn't afforded me the opportunities Europe has. The passport allows me to live in 27, 28 countries, look into my options, meet people from everywhere, and just be in a kind of a diverse environment, which I think better suits my personality. Without the close family ties, I do absolutely miss the good friends I have there. I have a few very select people that, and one that's, they would be my family. And for them, I've missed not coming back. But I'll kind of choose when I go back, because culturally, I'm not a natural fit now. I don't know if it's super obvious from looking at me, but I glow in the dark. This wasn't a skill that I had expected to develop. This wasn't one that I requested. This merely comes down to the fact that I am sitting on a spectacularly large amount of DNA that is Irish and Scottish. I've had it done through one of the services, and as such, I am very much pale as you please, glow in the dark. I do freckle from time to time, but it doesn't even look like I've got any at the moment, I don't think, which is disconcerting. But it's also that I don't go out in the sun. I don't go out in the sun because it does tend to burn, but it doesn't actually burn on this side of the world anywhere near as much as it would burn me in Australia. So I get burnt within less than 5 minutes of being outside in Australia, definitely without sunscreen, and to some extent milder, but with sunscreen. That is how harsh the sun is. Whereas over this side of the world, I could forget. Gosh, in Barbados on occasion I forgot and went swimming and was fine. Not even a little pink. I wouldn't have got away with that in Australia. I'd have been red for like 2 weeks. A week, 2 weeks. So conducive wise to actual, everyday living, I can't just walk outside the house there. I have to gear up and protect. So it's doable, but it's also a little less fun. And I'm always putting a stack of sunscreen on my system, which the less you put on your skin, because your body does absorb it, the better. That might be harmful. So I do get sun, I do go outside, but I don't have to think about putting sunscreen on every day when I'm in Europe in comparison. So why I don't live in Oz, it's not the right fit for me on a whole lot of fronts. And I don't know where my forever home will be, because I want to find community or build community and find a place that's just kind of beautiful and at ease. But I also know that I don't know that I'm up to the summers that it has there anymore. Yeah. So I think I may be an alien, and I don't know that my planet exists anywhere but the Star Trek universe. I know that's a bit of a digression, but I don't have a natural cultural fit in Australia, so I'm a cultural refugee running around Europe trying to find some randomness of what works for me and what's community. And while Oz has a lot of benefits, a lot of people emigrate there, and they love visitors. I recommend people visit, and there are scary creatures, but most of them are actually non-aggressive, and there's a lot of signs, and you're usually quite protected, and the odds of anything happening are really quite low. So it's a great place, but it's just not necessarily the place for me. Even though I spent decades there and grew up there and born and raised there, and probably do have some of the signature things that are Australian. So it took me a little while to work out what is very Irish and Australian about me as a separate, and that would be hopefully my storytelling, because I didn't pick up the drinking or the sport watching. I do eat meat pies though. Anyway, that might be another cultural video on Australia. I'm really not the best person to do that though. Anyway, there it is. Why I don't live in Oz.